right then, let me welcome you. I'm so glad to see such a packed room. Clearly this is a topic of interest. My name is Nicholson. I'm president of Sustainable Tompkins, and I want to welcome you to the People's Salon. Our theme this spring is the climate, the market, and the commons. And of course tonight our topic is in this conversation arc we're looking especially at climate denial. Before we get going though, a few things to say. One is that I want to extend my gratitude to Chris McConkey and Bill and Eddie for volunteering on very short notice to step forward and record tonight's salon. We were hearing we've had a lot of feedback on the listservs and people from as far away as Vermont asking, was this going to be recorded, because they couldn't come to it, so they wanted to hear it. And so we're experimenting with, of course it's a tricky thing to try to record a group conversation. So this is an experiment tonight, but I'm grateful for them coming and trying and setting it all up. Now, a few rules of engagement for a conversation salon. I've put some over here on the wall for us to follow over the course of the salon series. These are taken off the Conversation Cafe website. That was something that my friend Vicki Robin got going back after 9/11 to host conversations, and they're pretty simple. Try to be open-minded and tolerant of other kinds of perspectives than yours. Suspend judgment. Curiosity is a good thing to always bring with you, so that you're trying to understand a variety of points of view. And then, of course, brevity. There's a lot of us here. We want you to be honest and go deep, but don't go on and on. Share the airspace. That's going to be very important with this many people here to be in conversation. So as I said, tonight is the topic is climate denial. On May 8th, we'll be looking at the next topic, which is in terms of the issue of climate change. Can business and technology save us? So we're going to be having some guest speakers join us that night and have what could be a very good conversation. Oh, and I see one of them is right there. Stu Sanford will be, and Marty's here tonight too, right there. They will be two of our respondents next time. And then on June 5th, we'll be looking at the role of government, and we'll have Barbara Lifton and Savante Myrick, our mayor, and Tony Ingraffia. And then on June 19th, it'll be what's the role of the people, of the citizenry, and that will be with Reed Sturberger and I thought it was Reed. It's like, no, you're just waving. And Miranda Phillips and myself. So I wanted to also remind people that these salons are not about finding the answer. It's really just about this opportunity for exploration and speculation and reflection and sharing. It's a very complex topic, climate change, and we need to find ways to talk about it, and this is part of that, learning how to talk about it. Not just here, but out in your lives, with your family and your coworkers and your friends and colleagues. So how we're going to structure this is going to be introducing our three guests who are going to help us kick off the topic, and then we're going to try to work our way through those four topic questions around this topic of denial. So you can read those and be kind of keeping them in mind. And to try to keep it kind of organized, especially with this many people, let's try to just deal with one part of it at a time, so that we can be as coherent as we can in working our way through it. And then I'm going to save 10 minutes at the end for people who've got other related topics or announcements that they would like to make. So if you've got things that don't fit in there, save them to the end. So
I'm curious, can people read the lower questions, or should we lift them up a little bit?
Oh, and well, I'll speak to them, but I'll read them out right now so you can just have them in mind. The first topic is looking at yourself and your own family. How is climate denial showing up in your life? The second one is, well, how is climate denial similar to or different from other kinds of denial that we humans indulge ourselves in? The third one is, what lessons can be learned from other social movements in terms of overcoming denial? Because, you know, that's always what we're trying to do, it seems. And the fourth one is, what approaches seem useful in overcoming climate denial here in our culture? So, so we have with us tonight three great people that I respect a good deal. We have Nancy Menning, who's an assistant professor of philosophy and religion at Ithaca College, and her specialty is religion and ecology. Her recent work has emphasized the religious aspects of climate change in terms of narratives and spiritual practices for cultivating environmental virtues, rituals for mourning environmental losses, and strategies for teaching religion and nature using literature. And we have Lauren Chambliss, who's the Director of Communications for the Atkinson Center for a Sustainable Future up at Cornell University. And she's she oversees their communications and publicities and outreach. And I've known Lauren for a while, and especially got to know her quite well last year when she was on the steering committee of the Climate Smart and Climate Ready conference that we put together, and organizing the first main plenary session. And one of the people at that session was Dave Wolfe, who I was his first grad student, briefly, way back when. And he's a professor of horticulture at Cornell University, and with a specialty in plant and soil ecology, and as a leading authority on climate change impacts on crop soils and ecosystems. He co-chairs Cornell's Climate Change Program Work Group and chairs the Atkinson Center's Climate Change Focus Group. And he was one of the main lead author of the Ecosystems and Agriculture chapters in the 2011 ClimAid report for New York State. So he is well-versed in what our vulnerabilities and adaptation strategies might be for New York. So to kick off our conversation, we are just going to hear from our three guests, and we'll segue into those questions as well. So I don't know who wants to go first. Go in order, or whoever feels moved to share.
All right, yeah, so it's interesting. I've been doing research on climate change, adaptation, and mitigation for a couple decades now, and it's been interesting watching how things change and evolve, including the climate moving along faster than I expected, unfortunately. What I've kind of found now is, at the beginning, as a scientist, I sort of thought it was a matter of getting the information out, and obviously that's not the case. We've been doing that for a couple decades with little impact. And so now there's actually, and I'm not alone in realizing that, and there's now a growing literature. In fact, the literature on why we're not doing anything about climate change is becoming as big as the climate change literature per se. And a lot of this comes down to psychology, social sciences, humanities, evolution, etc. And I think a lot about this myself in terms of communication. And so I wanted to talk, and I've kind of begun to develop some thoughts about this regarding a book I'm working on, and Lauren's working on that with me actually, is the evolution of the human mind and why we might have too high of expectations of what we can accomplish, and we have to at least realize our limits, let's put it that way. And so a few things, if you got a few little notes here about what I wanted to bring up here. First of all, we have to keep in mind that the mind is just an organ, like the wings of a bird or whatever. It's something that we are particularly far involved with, I guess you might say. But intelligence is a fairly recent trait. And this organ of ours evolved through natural selection, like all parts of our bodies, and every living thing evolved that way. Unless we have some deniers of evolution here, which I guess is possible. But one thing to think about is the way natural selection works is responding to local problems. That's how the mind works. That's because that's how it evolved, right? And so I think we really have a hard time grasping global problems. So it's much easier for us to grasp a local environmental pollution problem than it is global climate change. And so I think this has been one of the reasons for paralysis, is until we start seeing and feeling local effects, it's hard for people to get their minds wrapped around it. Now we do have intelligence. You would think we could think more abstractly, but it doesn't really hit us in the gut until it becomes local. And this is also a challenge when it comes to people feeling like we should hold off on doing something about it, because what they can see sometimes, what their paranoia is that the local impact they're going to feel is something on their pocketbook like a carbon tax. And so to deal with some global climate change, we're going to impose a carbon tax, which is going to affect them. So that's one thing. Also, the mind evolved to solve problems, pragmatic. And so we really, if we don't come to people with solutions, they end up being fairly paralyzed. Another thing is our mind evolved in a planet where there's really very few people until just the last few hundred years, really. Our population is just going up exponentially now, but during early crop domestication, for example, there were only 10, 15 million people on the planet. So we're not used to this. It's hard for us to wrap our minds around this idea that there's limited resources and a lot of us. We also, modern human civilization, in our modern thought process, in our modern cultural evolution, really evolved in a time of climate stability. As we came out of the last ice age and hit the so-called Holocene era, we've been in a long period of 10,000 years now of relative climate stability. Now, of course, we're moving out of that, but it's hard for us to think about that. The other thing is social structures. So I think another thing in terms of human mental evolution, and something that you can find in the literature, is the self-awareness that we have with our intelligence trait. In some ways can work for us, in some ways can work against us. And there's a whole school of thought that is that we've built complex social structures like U.S. government or whatever the cultural group you belong to sort of free us from our freedom of choice. There's an anxiety about having our free will and our choice. And so we let these cultural groups make some of our decisions for us, like to go to war to get more resources so we can live better. Or you could belong to a cultural group that you feel you really need them because they free you up from all this anxiety of having to make lots of choices. And it could be that one of their choices, the group's choice, is to deny climate change. And you might not even morally or based on the science really go along with that, but the group is so important to you, you will deny climate change to stay with the group. And that's another angle of climate change and this denial thing. And finally, I wanted to say on a separate note, going away from, so those are my evolutionary things I wanted to mention. I just want to mention one other thing, and it comes from decades of working with different stakeholder groups, is I find that when I've dug deep with some of those people who are really become friends of mine, and they are sort of in that denier camp, I think. But when I dig deep with them, I find out that often that's really not the case. That really, for example, myself and a climate scientist from the University of Illinois a couple years ago met with the president of the Farm Bureau and his chief of staff, his executive director, et cetera, because they had written some things that were actually fairly like non-believers of climate change, and that didn't make sense because it affects farmers so dramatically. We came there with our best slides to convince them, we did our slideshow, and they almost really sort of just chuckled like, we know all that stuff. We know that. Their concern is really what I mentioned at the beginning, kind of the economic story. They had a lot of uncertainty about climate change, and I think some of that was fed into, that got built up, and there were a lot of uncertainties about climate change because, the kind of information they were getting. But they believed that it was possible. Some farmers might be negatively affected. But they thought, first of all, that the smart business farmers would find a way to adapt. And the second thing was they were concerned that any credence given to climate change would encourage the wacky policymakers in Washington to establish something that would be far worse for the farmers than a little climate change that they thought they could deal with. And so rather than give credence to that and bring all of that on, they really it's like this smoke screen of denial, which is actually sort of I'm glad they at least do believe in thermometers and Arctic ice melting and this evidence. But it is still, that's what I think one of the challenges I think we face. So I'll stop with those comments.
So I'm going to riff off that actually, because in addition to being the Director of Communications for the Atkinson Center, where we are communicating daily about sustainability issues like climate change, I also teach communication skills to students on this topic. And it's gotten trickier and trickier. It's really hard to communicate about climate change because we're learning more and more about how we assimilate information and how we cherry pick data. So it's not necessarily just give the public more information and they'll understand more, because we all go through processes of things called motivated reasoning, where we pick the facts that help support the beliefs we already have. It's very hard to break through to new ground. We tend to have all sorts of things that are coming into play when we hear information from news sources or from the radio or from television or from a friend. And some of these things are our cultural norms, which Dave talked about, our social groupings, whether or not we place a higher value on things like cooperation than we do competition, or if we place a high value on authority rather than community. Those sorts of divides are what make us more likely or less likely to understand, to assimilate, and to absorb the information about climate science. So the tricky part is, how do we as people who care about climate change and want to motivate some sort of social movement around this communicate in ways that are effective so that people can at least begin to get slightly around that denial? And I don't think there's a simple answer. It depends entirely on the audience. And what doesn't help is when we get into a frame of we're right and they're wrong. If we understand it as value systems that people are responding to, and don't see it as what is wrong with those people, they're stupid, they're not paying attention, but see it as a much bigger pool, or a much larger information pool from which we all act and are motivated, I think then we can have maybe a little more understanding that there are differences of opinions, whether or not they're science-based. And they're not science-based if they're not believing in climate change, but that's not the point. It's like, where do we pick at that denial piece from a place where other human beings who don't necessarily believe it or may not have enough information can begin to assimilate it in a way that will actually lead to some of the things we're going to talk about later. There's a lot of social science research now in this area, and all of it makes it even more challenging and scary. There is no simple answer. There's no easy way. There's no right way. It's a matter of trying lots of different ways and understanding that we're not moving simply from a place of lack of information. In fact, that's generally not the problem. Some of the people who are the most strongly in denial actually are highly scientifically literate and technologically savvy. So we're not talking about people who don't have education or scientific basis or knowledge. They're people who have it and still choose to say climate change is not happening or it's not caused by humans. So those challenges are part of what I hope we'll talk about in looking at both our own lives and the social factors that are having an influence on all this. Some of which we're about to hear about.
Okay. We'll see what I say. Right. So Lauren asked the question in part in her comments, how do we communicate effectively? And in my work in religious studies, so I study the world religions in all sorts of modes, my kind of key insight on climate change from my disciplinary perspective is I'm really interested in the power of religious rhetoric and the way in which we tell the story about climate change and whether it opens up possibilities for good communication, transformation, and action. To set that up, I'll tell just a brief story about kind of what motivates all my work. I was reading a short essay one time about Los Angeles, written by a landscape photographer. And he was talking about Los Angeles as it existed in, say, 1880 and what it had become by 1980. And in the midst of this short essay, he had this line that said, "All that is clear is the perfection of what we were given, the unworthiness of our response, and the certainty, in view of our current deprivation, that we are judged. Well, there's lots of ways to talk about what happened to the Southern California landscape over the 100 years from 1880, and it's kind of, citrus grows in this nice Mediterranean climate to kind of the paved over, beat up place it is now. That could sound a whole lot more scientific than that. But here the force of the rhetoric there, it's a religious narrative. It's about leaving Eden, right? All that is clear is the perfection of what we were given, the unworthiness of our response, and the certainty in view of our current deprivation that we are judged, right? There's nothing explicitly religious about that in the sense of you have to believe to a particular religion to get that story. That story has a narrative force that seems very compelling to me. And it's what drives the work that I do to try to figure out how to leverage religious rhetoric, religious language like that as a cultural resource without making theological claims for people or trying to proselytize and convert people to one religion or the other, but to just draw upon the wisdom of the cultural traditions, all the world religions, to see if they can address our problems. So I'm really interested in the way language works. And so when I think about climate change, one of the focuses I have is again, how the narrative constructions we make, how do we tell the story of climate change? And there's a scholar in the UK who talks about kind of dominant framings for this story, and he uses religious language, so of course I love him, right? One is the kind of an Edenic narrative, lamenting Eden, the sense in which what we've done to the climate, what we've done to nature in a certain sense is destroyed it. Even the atmospheric systems are broken now, and we're outside of Eden, right? If you tell climate change as that loss of Eden story, what could you possibly do? There you are on the outside of Eden. It's a disempowering narrative, right? Then you can do climate change and tell the story of climate change, putting the scientific facts in a story arc as apocalypse, right? The apocalyptic scenario, and we're just foretelling it or presaging an apocalypse. That's not an entirely empowering narrative either, right? Most religious traditions, when they're talking about apocalypse, are pretty much like getting right with God, because there's not much else they can do as it's coming on, right? And so that doesn't help us act, right? And then another narrative, some of you may be familiar with a narrative in the early chapters of the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible about constructing a tower up to see God in heaven, right? The Tower of Babel, and God gets a little bit mad about that. That kind of climate change narrative, if we do it that way, that's when we're talking about geoengineering and the scientific and technological, fixes that we're going to impose so that we can fix it all. If that's an empowering narrative, it's empowering to technologists and scientists. But for the rest of us, we might as well keep watching the Packers play, on Sunday afternoon, because there's not much else we can do. None of these narratives are the kinds of narratives that can really motivate a people to get together and do something about the challenge we have in front of us. And so then out of my perspective, that's all the UK scholar unpacking that from there. And then I think, well, what would be a better narrative? And so the narrative that I advocate, a narrative structure to tell the story of climate change, uses the ritual language of rites of passage. And so we have rites of passage in our culture, marriages, puberty ceremonies, whatever, that move people from one stage of life into another. So a rite of passage of marriage, take a couple of people who are single, you run them through a little ritual, and they're married at the end, right? Puberty rituals, you take somebody who's a child, a young boy or a girl, you run them through a ritual process, and they're technically an adult at the other end. You do this especially with puberty because it's a really dangerous time. Things can go wrong. Undergraduate college years seem to be like this as well. We can think of going to college as a rite of passage, and we leave behind living at home, and then we go through this extended transitional rite of passage, hopefully successfully, to be a graduate on the other end, an adult on the other end. It's a new kind of puberty ritual. What if we told climate change that way? That we have left behind ecologies and economies we've known. We are now in an extended liminal or transitional period that will extend beyond all of our lifetimes, but in hopes that at some point we will come again into new ecologies and economies that are also stable. If we tell the story that way, and we think about the way rites of passage work, it's not just that puberty happens, right? If you're going to do it as a rite of passage, the community gathers, and the child is mentored, and taught what it means to be an adult. And the community comes together to celebrate that and ritualize that transition. This is the kind of narrative that can start to bring people together to talk about how do we move through this liminal transition. I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying we have really great models for it, but what I like about this reframing the climate change story is that it does kind of ask us to step up and marshal one another through the process. And that to me is empowering and hopeful in that sense. So that's one of the ways in which I think about narratives and climate change. And I'll share maybe just one other example of the way in which I think we can draw on religious language, even if we don't belong to particular religions, where language comes from, to kind of imagine different ways of being. And this one turns on the practice or the virtue of hospitality. And Abraham in the Genesis tradition is probably the classic model of hospitality. There he is, it's sitting outside his tent, he sees 3 people coming up the hill, and immediately, welcomes them, right? Things go badly later, but anyhow, the practice of hospitality, Sodom and Gomorrah is kind of the next story there, being destroyed by these visitors. But anyhow, there is this practice of hospitality, which is a virtue then in the Abrahamic traditions, so this would be shared by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Don't we imagine that in a climate-changing world, the one we live in now, that there will be human populations that are displaced, there will be plant and animal populations that will be displaced, and should we just put up the barriers and shut the doors and be afraid of people pouring across the border, or should we be practicing and cultivating a spirit of hospitality, building on the power and the force of the rhetoric of the Abrahamic story, to see if we can do this a little better and imagine ourselves as different kinds of people. Abraham is maybe an easy situation. Abraham is operating from a position of power. Another powerful story about hospitality, this was actually shared with me by a Jewish theologian who is currently the president of the American Academy of Religion, so people who study religion in all sorts of modes. And she told me 10 days ago that she wants all 10,000 members of that professional organization, the American Academy of Religion, to recognize that climate change is interrupting all of our academic projects, all of our scholarly agendas, and it is time to do something. She wants every one of the 10,000 of us to get off our little microscopic, typical, oh, Lear, I'm studying this like tiny little culture that doesn't change anything, and like do something about climate change. She pointed out to me the hospitality narrative later in the book of Genesis, near the end of it, where, for those of you who know the Hebrew scriptures, Joseph has been sold into slavery by his 11 brothers and has gone on down to Egypt and has gotten himself in prison there, but then, in the favor of the Pharaoh, who's had a dream that there will be, as interpreted by Joseph, 7 years of plenty, and 7 years of famine, right? Are we not looking at some years of famine coming up in a climate change world? Joseph organizes a gathering up of the resources, and then the hospitality is when his family comes looking for something to eat. And he, because he has organized a system in which there has been food put aside, is able to welcome them into that and perpetuate that culture. Another story of hospitality, and one that doesn't come particularly, the hospitality offers his brothers. These are the guys who sold him into slavery right after they decide, I guess we just won't kill him, right? I mean, why would you offer hospitality to these people? But he does, and it goes well in the end, right? I don't know, Gay, if you want us to turn to the more personal narratives, or if you want to do something else.
No, we are definitely going to turn to asking, one of the reasons why we wanted to start with the personal narratives is that it's so easy to get angry at the system, or the frackers and ExxonMobil and people who have a vested interest in maintaining a climate denial machine. Because it isn't just ExxonMobil. They're definitely involved, and they're definitely, funding that machine. But let us start with the reality that we all have. Denial shows up in our lives and in our families in one way or the other. So I thought it would be good for us to do that sort of reflection. And we'll start with our guests, speakers, but then we'll open up to everybody. And Tom here is going to help me keep track of whose hands went up in what sequence, and again, brevity as much as you can. But what we'll be doing, if somebody has already had a chance to speak and somebody else is, and they're in the queue, but somebody else is going to speak for the first time, we'll let the people who haven't spoken before jump ahead, right? To make sure that we all get a chance to talk. We also have cards at the back. If you want something, cards and pens, if you want to write down your thoughts so you don't lose track of them. I know I need to do that a lot of the time. What was I going to say? So they're at the back, and they're available to you. So, but now we'll go back and let Nancy continue.
Start this, if that's good. Is there a question for clarification there?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I can't hold the notice that a lot of my students are white folks, and I was just wondering if someone else would be willing to give folks of color standing in the back and share. I just wanted to hear.
Thank you.
So if there may be a little bit of shifting chairs around, folks in the back are welcome to come forward and take some other seats in the front, I guess, if you're interested in that. I'll just share one thought I have about my own kind of personal transformation. It occurs to me as I think about the way our minds work and our experience of weather not being the same as understanding climate. Religious traditions have a capacity to try to do practices to change our perceptions somehow. And, you know, it may be that as I was walking over here this evening, it seemed like a perfectly fine day. It was a beautiful day out there. That was my experience of the weather. And there is a certain kind of cachet right now, a certain kind of preference for thinking we should be mindful and in the present, right? That's kind of a jargon in the spirituality culture now, practicing our mindfulness, which is being present. But if I'm being present as I'm coming over here merely, it seems like a perfect day, and I don't know why I'd be worried about climate change. And so it has struck me in the last few weeks that a good meditation practice for somebody like me is to be able to wake up in the morning and before I do much of anything else, bring to mind, become mindful of a future that may come before the end of my natural lifetime in which the human species is extinct. And if not the human species, perhaps many other species. How would my way of seeing the world be transformed if I practiced imagining the world that we're moving toward more deeply and held that in a meditative space? And then as I left my meditation and went out into the world, would I not have more compassion? Would I not be more motivated? I think there's a way to do this kind of imagination of the future, the imagination of the suffering of others, the imagining of my daughter's future, and even at this point now my own future. To see that clearly in an imaginative space, to exercise my heart and the capacity of my heart to open and be compassionate, in addition to any kind of thinking I do about what I need to know about climate change and how we can respond to it. That's what I got.
That's good.
Thank you, dear.
I'm going the whole other direction. How many people here meditate on a regular basis? Right, and one of the classic meditations is to face your own death. Is that right? Right?
It's true. It's true.
I can't meditate. And that's one of the reasons why. Because contemplating my own death, while not scary to me, is not something that I do with any regularity or any ease. And that gets us to one of the pieces about climate change denial that I think is at the root of so many of us, is that if we face the fact that climate change is happening, we have to face the fact that as a species we might perish, and certainly lots of others are already going, and there will be many more after them. We're in the sixth extinction, et cetera, et cetera. But this came home to me about a month ago when I was in San Francisco at a group of geophysicists talking about climate change communication, and my son, who's 25, came and listened. And first the climate scientist went, and then someone else, and then someone else, and then me, the communications person. And at the end of the talk, my son, my 25-year-old son, who's been living with me for 21 of those 25 years, came up to me and said, "God, Mom, that was really scary. What is the one thing one person can do? And after I got my wits about me, I thought about that later. I said my one thing, but later I went, my God, how could he have lived with me all these years and not had that sense of horror and grief and scariness? And I realized after I kind of did a little self-examination that I've been shielding my kids from what I believe deep inside. Not that I didn't talk about climate change, not that I didn't describe what I thought was happening, but I never communicated the depths of my own personal despair about it. To the point where my 25-year-old son, when he heard, 4 people talking who were scientists and not even talking from that heart place, was like, oh my God, this is really scary. And so I realized there has been a piece of me that has not wanted to communicate, that's been in denial about taking what I know and moving it out in that apocalyptic way, which is so utterly scary to people and is not actually a very effective communication form. So I find that kind of tension in me about, well, how do I communicate what the hell I really know, while at the same time trying to communicate in a way that people can actually hear, and then owning my own denial around it.
The thing I'll mention, I'll speak brief so we can hear from some of the rest of you, but kind of somewhat related to that, and it kind of has to do with the job I have. So a big part of my job is, trying to do something about climate change, and in a certain way, that makes me feel really lucky, because I'll give a talk somewhere, and I'll have people coming up to me that are really grieving and frustrated, and I realize that what I've done is sort of buffer myself from that by staying busy, creating a career for myself where I'm doing something about it. So I'm kind of buffered from that, but I never do stop to really look inward and get really scared, except for there's one graphic that some of you may have seen me present that just really shows how far off the norm we're going to go in the next 100 years, how fast the pace of climate change is compared to the historical ice age transitions and the dramatic climate changes that the planet's gone through many times, but just how, about 100 times faster than the last ice age transition. And whenever I show that graph, it really scares the pants off me, and I think I've just been, I'm really kind of denying that. The other denial thing I'll just mention is it's more a matter of, since I'm doing something about climate change, I think it's not really denial, but I sort of rationalize. We all can be kind of guilty about we're not doing everything we could do to conserve on energy and all that. And I kind of say, well, I'm doing this, getting other people to do stuff for them. And I really I think I kind of rationalize that. Well, I'm not doing everything I could do. We're not walking the walk that much, but I'm doing my part, this other part, which is talking about it. Yeah. Anyways.
Well, let's hear from all of you. Who would like to lead off on that topic of how is climate denial showing up in your life or in your family?
Person over here.
I moved to Tompkins County because it had all the cool kids of energy descent, and found that even there, the economics of people who are too vested in fossil fuels, too vested in doing things as we have done them and not wishing to see how much change is needed, pretty much pulls the economic rug out from under my enterprise. I'm regrouping right now. I'm not going to be able to sell wood heating to very many people yet, because there's why change? We don't need to change. We got something cheap. It's here.
So what's showing up in my personal life is not so much denial, I would say, as hitting against priorities, like taking care of your family within social norms that we have, means that, for instance, your child gets this fantastic chance to have an educational opportunity on the other side of the planet. Do you encourage them to go do that, or discourage them because we're moving into this new moral compass? And I think most of us are still in the mode, because of social norms. Sure, let's fly you to Australia for this retreat or workshop or whatever, college. And that's kind of a large example, but that sort of thing happens all the time, right? Do you drive your kids to the movies? Do you, all these kind of things. Do you prioritize changing your furnace in your house over putting that money in the college fund? So I think the limits we seem to be hitting have to do with, doing these really noble things, taking care of your family, which is very biological, within the social norms that we have. Until the whole society starts shifting and changing those values, it's very hard to swim upstream.
Can't really see Phoebe and then back there.
You don't want me to stand up?
Yes, please, and everybody should use your outdoor voice.
Speak up, yes.
My reality is maybe not even 8 months ago, I didn't even really care about climate change. And it's not the priority for me today. But my priority knows that I cannot get what I need to happen if I don't work with people who need climate change. So what I'm learning over these last 8 months is that all movements work together. So in order for me to see a change, I have to be open. So I come in a room tonight and I look around and I see all you people here, all you white people. But I say how important this is to you, and I say to myself, why aren't there more people like me here that look like me? And it's not that they're not having this conversation, but I find now that most people are just so anxious and scared and nervous and rambling around like we gotta do something right now. And that's usually how we always live. So it's like, I was at a meeting with this gentleman a few months ago. He started talking about climate change. I was like, please, no more. I can't take it today. I said, listen, what I'm going to do is go home, have a good time, and party like a rock star until things happen. Yeah. Because I think I heard a lot of good stuff from you, but what I didn't hear is, like, we talk about denial, but reality is that it's going to happen. No matter how hard we work, this is how the earth works. That much I know. So, I mean, let's love each other, sing kumbaya, have some fun, and just enjoy the time we got together. Because it's going to happen whether y'all want it to or not. It is. But have a good time in the meantime. But for real, no, I am just kidding with that. But what I am doing is saying that what has happened for me is that, like, it has allowed me to realize that my priority, which is that people look like me have equal rights, that people look like me continue to have some of the good things that a lot of you people have. I mean, not just you people, but to be able to enjoy this life that we already have. And I know in order for me to do that, I have to be open and try to learn about this whole climate change thing. Because I know today is April, 17? And the weather out there tells me something's happening. That snowy day the other day tells me something's really happening, Phoebe. So anyway, y'all want me to talk more? Okay.
I'll bring more
Corner? Just want to play off of what the gentleman in the redhead said. I think we just heard two really important and probably prominent places that average people are coming from. I don't care what color you are. And here, people are either working their butts off to, feed their family, and they would love to help save the planet, sure, but man, today I gotta pay the bills, or screw it, man, I have a better outlook on things, I've gotta live it up, there's nothing I can do about it. Both of those are pretty powerless, and I think that's what you guys were getting at is that everyone is really afraid to admit that we're scared out of our minds about it, you know, and that's, we have to face that as a culture, as a world. We really do have to be okay with the fact that we're scared, that we're here for each other instead of, I don't know, putting our heads down and going about whatever we were doing or partying, because neither one of those is going to work anymore. And you're right, maybe it's inevitable, but I feel like we should try, and I think I'm not alone.
Well, go ahead.
I love what you were saying about having old roots and to draw from as a general consciousness, and I take the Caleb approach of going in with the giants, and Caleb said, there are giants, but we can deal with it. And I also like what Phoebe said about keeping some joy alive in it. I just saw A Wonderful Life, the film about Nazi Germany and the family that protected their child through making the experience, putting some joy into it. A little bit of denial, lots of denial, maybe 100% denial, but nonetheless, making it manageable. And taking what Phoebe said, and keeping that joy alive, but using that joy as a motivator to do things. And I think like something like the Grassroots Festival that have taken a target and said, you know what, we're going to hear some music, we're going to dance while we're supporting this endeavor. And I think that Ithaca is famous for that anyway. So if we can share our wonderful message, our 10 square miles surrounded by that sad truth, but we can show them how to do it by just keeping our joy alive as we approach this very real issue, but without tenseness, but with joy of just saying, well, this is what it is, but we have some possibility. Why not try and make this work? So that's.
Janella? The gentleman next to
Janella and then Stu.
Yeah.
I was next really. I think you moved me up on the line. But I don't even know how to really speak to this because I wasn't quite sure whether I was going to come out tonight because in case everyone knows there's always things going on 7 days a week, every evening, and it's sometimes just not want to stay home. But I got caught in an email thread and invited, called up Phoebe, and I ended up wanting to come out. So the one thing that I want to say, and it caught me off guard, and I guess I try to speak my truth, and I know that I don't really enjoy making anybody feel uncomfortable because I don't like feeling uncomfortable. So I figure, why do that? But I do know that when I was listening to the guests speak, and thank you for sharing, the term apocalyptic came up, and that is kind of scary. And I am not really a religious one because that type of religion is not what I believe in. I believe in a faith and a spirituality, and might have some of the same names, but that apocalyptic thing resonated. And what really struck me was, well, I surely would go into denial if that was what everything looks like it's pointing towards. And one of the sobering things, and I felt like I couldn't come out tonight and not share it, is that within this room, including myself and others, we are very fortunate. But right outside of those 10 square miles is this apocalypse unfolding, not just in climate, but also in the lives of people who live in neighborhoods and in communities where they don't have the protection that many have been fortunate enough to insulate and keep at bay the pollution from the stacks and all of those things that have contributed to where we are. I don't like looking at things uncomfortable. I don't like it at all, and I probably would be just fine being in my blissful ignorance. But when I started doing work in the food system, it became so critical to me because I saw what it means for us to live. And so I guess in the email thread, which I'm not saying people should go read, but and I put it on the list, no less, I commented, but is that if I'm motivated by fear, I'm going to become paralyzed. I mean, I get paralyzed with fear, no matter what it is. If it's a mouse in my house and I'm afraid of it, I'm paralyzed. If it's the world coming to the end or whatever. But I think that when I look at climate change, the truths are glaring. And I wonder what it's calling us to do. Because our options seem very, like, really, what can you do? Can we really fix the planet? I'm like, oh, but I have some amazing, like, love from a child around science and what's possible in life. And I think a lot of that has to do with our intentions and the way we choose to look at something. So I am trying to find courage not to be afraid, but to find some kind of place in me that has enough love for humanity in my life to see what responsibility that's going to call upon me to deal with this. And I don't know what it's going to mean, but I do know that there are people right now. I went to Detroit on several occasions. Elon has come with me and others. Yeah, and right now there's 50,000 people without water. And I mean, they get up and they go to work. They have jobs, whatever. But because of the city's crisis and they're in that kind of a situation, and all of it is tied together. So what I say is that, like, my hope is that we really can find that courage that we need, and I think it's going to come out of some kind of reaction that's not out of fear, but out of love. A lot of us will have to sacrifice because things are going to get bad, but I'm telling you, there are people that are sacrificing this moment in this county and around the 10 square miles in ways that we would not even be able to handle in ourselves. And I think it's kind of sobering. I don't want to lead with that as your imprint of my word, but my word is that, you know, it has to be some place where we find a common reason to do something differently to make it work. You know, and I think it's got to be out of love. So that's my 2 cents.
Right on to it.
Front here, and then
Let's do
one over here, and then Don. So 1, 2, 3.
After Stu.
After Stu.
Yeah, Stu is up right
Stu's
behind
next.
Jamila.
I guess I wanted to say that, I mean, I think denial it's originally a psychoanalytic term, right? And it means that the concept is that there are thoughts that are like so painful that if you were to think them, your feelings would be overwhelming, right? And so you don't even think that thought. And in sort of analyzing my own feelings, there are 2 sets of things that come up, right? One is guilt, right? Because we're all complicit to varying degrees. I mean, our whole society has been running on fossil fuels for a couple of 100 years, and now we discover that, oh crap, you know, that's screwing up the climate. And so we're all complicit, you know, some maybe more than others, but we're all complicit, and we all, I'm sure, feel guilt, certainly I do, for my remaining contributions to the problem. And then the other is fear, right? And so I kind of think a lot of it's like emotional work, right? How do you take the fact that you feel fearful and you need to respond to that with courage, because the situation is not hopeless. We don't know that we're all doomed, right? There's choices and there are possible outcomes, and we need to move forward. And then we also need to manage our own guilt, right? How do I accept the fact that yes, I'm complicit, but nonetheless, that doesn't mean I get to shut down and not look at that, right? I get to acknowledge that and say, you know, this day I could do this thing, next year I may do this other thing. We'll get there in stages, but, you know, move forward while remaining aware of our own guilt, right? Rather than just pushing the feelings away and not allowing ourselves to think of thoughts.
Okay, my name is Klaus. I grew up in Europe for 40 years, and now I'm in the United States, so I'm able to compare the 2 societies with each other. And I feel America lives in a state of abundance here for probably 50, 60 years, where everything is available. And I'm scared to buy toilet paper in America when I see 2 rows of toilet paper, just simple toilet paper, and I don't know which one to buy. So there's an abundance in everything we can imagine. We have comfort everywhere. Why would somebody willing to change this? Because it's been doing this for 50 years. And all of a sudden somebody hears about climate change. The person would say, that's not me. Let the government take care of it. Let the corporations take care of it. It's not me. I think we have forgotten to take on risk, and people don't want to take a risk. That something may change in her life and may create some difficulties. They don't want to do it. We have forgotten to take risk. We are so comfortable in our society. Everything is there, everything we need. So that is one part. We also learn to take on responsibility. Whenever something happened, we always blame somebody else. When Sandy came to New Jersey, people didn't say, oh yeah, why did I buy the house? They blamed the government, and they blamed the county. They blamed always somebody else. So why would I, as an ordinary person who always blames someone else, all of a sudden take on responsibility and say, it's me who creates the problem. I have to change attitudes. No, let my neighbor do this. They don't do that. Why should I do that? I think this is beside the denial, these are two other aspects. Not taking on responsibility and not willing to get out of our comfort zone. We have lived so well for 50, 60 years.
Good, thank you very much. Sir?
Greetings.
Greetings.
I like that. My name is Tommy, and what's resonating with me, first of all, let me say that I appreciate this opportunity for us to engage in courageous conversation. I think it's very healthy to have mutually respectful dialogue and look at all the perspectives. So when I ponder the question, looking at yourself and your own family, I look at climate from a holistic point of view. And I look at humanity. How can I perform my humanity in such a way that I affirm and validate you and vice versa? On that note, I would be remiss if I look at it from a holistic point of view and look at the beloved community and did not take ownership or paint the truth. Even in Ithaca, systemic racism exists. I have to take personal ownership. Will I be a victim, or a conqueror? And on this subject of fear, the change that I've made in my life has been motivated by fear. When I'm in my comfort zone, I become complacent. As I continue to look from a holistic point of view at the community and the family, there's an Africa greeting, a Sawa tribe, mighty warriors. They greet each other. Somebody's shaking it, you know where I'm going with this. So how are the children? Right. And if you look underneath the iceberg, if you disrobe everything, it speaks to, that is the most important factor. I'd like to leave you with a term. It's UBANTU. Some of you are familiar with it. I am because we are.
Thank you. Thank you. Don, ladies next.
Sure. I like the way you started. Greetings.
Greetings.
Because we're in this as a community. I want to respond actually to some thoughts that you generated when you were talking up front. That most of our society, our culture is based on Judeo-Christian teachings. And the first, Genesis 1 talks about man having dominion over the earth. And actually it turns out that power and dominance is a very seductive emotion that hits all of us. And just to give you an idea how we think that we can conquer everything, maybe remember a few years ago we had an ozone hole. We decided we would change the chlorofluorocarbon emissions and we would do something with it. Whether we did or not, we don't know. We don't talk about it anymore. But the idea was that we, as humans, could go and affect the earth. We didn't translate that to the fact that we still are affecting the earth. I think the problem with power and dominance and the seduction of that is that we think of climate change, we think we can actually do something to correct this. There's some pill we can take. There's something that we can do. And I don't know how we get around it. We did talk about fear. I don't like the fear emotion, but nonetheless, I guess our political parties know that fear is a very powerful emotion as well. That may be one of the things we'll have to use. But I just want to make the point that we have something deep inside of us, which is the desire to have power and dominion, and that's what we're fighting here.
Thank you so much.
Can I finish my last statement? Something said very quickly. I would expeditious statement. I'm looking at you because you became a trigger when you were talking about Job. And what resonates with me for the rest of the story, if you will, is the power of forgiveness. The power of forgiveness. And when I don't forgive you, I become a prisoner within myself. How did that affect climate change? From a holistic point of view. Thank you for letting me add my little 2 cents.
Mrs. Allen?
So I just wanted to share something that as I'm listening, and I really appreciate the beauty and passion and honesty that everybody's bringing, the vulnerability, and it inspired in me thinking about why I don't act more than I want to, and I'm realizing that I have this experience that I think might be universal, which is there's so much going on that at the end of the day, and I'm working really hard just to make enough money so that I can afford everything, at the end of the day there are things that are happening. I'm thinking, I just need time for myself. I need to stay home. I can't go to this, X, Y, and Z thing. And so I end up missing maybe 90% of the things that I would like to be engaged in. And very recently I got involved in taking part in trying to affect the zoning law that was passed for College Town. And I had never been involved in advocacy to that level, or taking a real stand to try and affect a policy or a law that came into place locally. And it blew my mind how much something as boring as zoning really so significantly impacts our ability to be sustainable. And it freaked me out, and I got very emotional about it because I realized the fundamental nature that it's boring keeps everybody from showing up. And so, we pick those things that are, glamorous sounding or big sounding, and the things that slide underneath that really affect, what we're able to do are things like zoning. And so, I guess I would like to ponder collectively in our hearts, maybe not as a conversation, but how do we as a culture create enough time in our day so that by the end of the day we've had enough balance so that we still have energy to then engage in civic duty. And that's something that as a civilization is always extra. And how do we create a system so that we can all take part, so that we know what zoning is and its impact and we can influence it. So.
Thank you.
I have to respond to that. I really have to respond. What I need to just say is that, I know there's a whole lot of stuff going on everywhere, all day, all the time, and I get this question to me all the time. Phoebe, why are you involved in so much? You're gonna get burnt out. You need to step back, but I can't. I can't. My responsibility is to be there everywhere. And I do it because I remember who did it before me. And if Harriet Tubman said, I'm too tired today, there would have been 500 slaves that was not freed. So I can't, I jump at every meeting they have because I got to, because all of them work together. And I don't know, maybe I'm optimistic and I just want to clear to you, I don't mean just go, let's party.
No, you can tell me.
No, I mean the bottom line is it is happening. Let's work together to make it better. But let's not forget. Anyway, let me stop.
Let's just take one more and then we'll be on topic.
Yeah. Anyone else?
In the back?
Yes, in the back there.
I just want to say there's been some great things said, and I think it's important to focus on what, Kay, you said, and that is reality. And the reality is that we in this country and in the world, we're using incredible amounts of fossil fuels to live. A long time ago when I was in college, I sold my car and rode a bike because I didn't want to use so much fossil fuels. I saw the benefit of not using an excessive amount. And my roommate, who had a Jeep, ended up selling that too, and I was amazed. I didn't think that I would have any kind of influence on him, but he did. And my point is that there are a lot of good things happening. There's a lot of positive things happening, and I think thoughts of apocalypse are negative, and I don't think they're helpful. I really think that focusing on reality and not supernatural philosophies is a positive way to go, because I think that can unite us, and the idea of love and working together with that, I think, can be extremely powerful. And lastly, I think, Don, your comment about dealing with the dominant and the power is very valid, and I think that that's what we are struggling with, because there's a lot of people with a lot of power and arrogance that are pushing these fossil fuels and the energy consumption that's causing some of our major problems. And I think we focus on that, and with a positive thought. I mean, Gabe, you've done an incredible amount of work with sustainable energy opportunities for our community, and I think that that kind of energy should be encouraged. I think that's a really good thing.
For sure. I think that, don't forget May 8th is when we're really going to be looking at this whole issue of capitalism, about the economy, the marketplace, and technology, and some really difficult collision courses that are out there. So we want to grapple with that. But in terms of looking a little more at this phenomena of denial, I thought it might be useful to spend a few minutes and see what the group intelligence is on this idea that, well, how is climate denial similar to other kinds of denial, or different from other kinds of denial that we might have in our lives? I mean, there are, maybe at the personal level, you might have a family member that is in denial that she drinks too much. So there's that, denial about being addicted, or denial about gambling, or whatever. There's lots of different kinds of denial. And then we have, as a species, throughout our species or across this planet, have had a lot of socially organized denial around some really ugly behavior. And so our third question is going to, look at some of the social movements that have tried to push back against some of that. But I just wanted to open it up and start with you three to see what do you think is maybe kind of unique about climate denial, or what are some interesting parallels with other kinds of denial that just might be useful for us to spend some time thinking about it, so that it helps us as we move forward, dealing with this.
So quickly, the one thought that comes to mind for me is somebody used the language of a courageous conversation, and the way denial works with climate change and other things, it seems to me, is like a whole lot of silence, right? The way in which we don't talk to one another enough to even know where we are, what we're thinking, and an example comes to mind working with a church congregation in Montana where they were getting ready to vote on a open and affirming policy to think that gay people could be in the church or something, right? And they studied it for 7 years. They were getting ready to come to a vote, and they didn't want to call for the vote until they were sure it was going to pass. And so they went out and met this committee went out and met one-on-one in people's homes and said, so how would you vote? And then I was listening to the feedback from that, as they were feeding back this anonymous survey kind of thing. And what I heard was that 80% of the people in that church were okay with it, but nobody else in their pew was. That's how they thought of it, right? Now, how could 80% of them be in favor of this when nobody else in their pew was? It means that they weren't talking to one another. Yeah. And I think denial lives well in our silence and our unwillingness to have difficult conversations, courageous conversations with one another.
I don't know that I have a lot to add to that. I think it gets down to uncomfortableness. We don't want to be uncomfortable in our lives. And there's all sorts of things that we deny, including the fact that we don't need 20 different kinds of toilet paper. Anyone who lives overseas, the first thing that happens when you come back and go into a grocery store is you can't even move. You're paralyzed because there's so many options that are so unnecessary. But do I spend any time thinking about that? No. Because the whole question, those whole questions of inequity are just ones that are embedded in our cultural norm. And I think climate change, we're attempting to move out of that cultural norm where we just accept it and don't see it for what it is, but it's still on the fringes, like all of these social movements. It's still not incorporated into the mainstream culture. I'm not sure it has to be, which is probably where I differ from most people. I think it's okay that some people are in denial. I wish they weren't, but I think we can get to the place where we need to be we can get change without having 80% of the people saying yes.
I would just add, I think climate change is a particularly tough nut to crack. It's not like other environmental problems that we've faced. Like someone mentioned the chlorofluorocarbons in the ozone, which created the ozone hole. So that meant we had to come up with some different chemicals for our spray cans. That's a little different than changing our whole energy system and our whole economy. So if I were to come up with a matching thing, the only one I can think of is, and it's dramatic, but it's actually comparable in some ways, is moving away from slavery in our nation. I mean, that had huge implications for our economy. And there were plenty of people who could come up with economic reasons, and there was obvious, you know, I mean, the whole structure of that, the whole notion of that was obviously totally built on a falsehood, that was okay, morally wrong, it was scientifically wrong, it just, you know, everything wrong with it. But, and what concerns me about that is we had success in moving beyond that, thank God, at least for the most part in this country. And, but that took decades. And it didn't, one thing that's different than the slavery issue is there wasn't a fuse ticking like there is with climate change. The longer, if it takes us decades, we move into a realm of climate change that really does get quite dramatic. And so I'll just leave it at that.
My name is Kathy Russell. I'm a philosopher. I would have to disagree that there wasn't a fuse ticking under slavery. I know it's jumping to the other question, but coming out of the labor movement, coming out of the movement against racism, coming out of the women's movement, there's the story of the recognition of oppression and the resistance to that, the story of overcoming. And I didn't hear that mentioned as a story because there were incredible horrors going on, and the clock was ticking because people were dying all the time. And there are women being raped, and there are people, the clock is ticking, but we're in denial. We don't want to recognize that the clock is ticking. It was ticking in 1754. It was ticking, ticking, ticking. But this is nothing new, that there are horrors happening, and people with privilege that can ignore them because they don't need to see them. But the clock has been ticking for a long time. I feel like
that's question number 3.
Marty?
Okay.
Yeah. Me? Should I go?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess the one of the things that I see happening in this movement that I've been uncomfortable with for a long time is we have to save the world. We have to prevent this. We have to stop it. We're past the point where we can stop it. And we've known for a while that we're past the point where we can stop it. And we need to change that rhetoric because people will despair when they realize that. And what I find when I think about this, I'm sort of thinking of it in terms of 12-step because that's what I'm most familiar with. The focus is not on the outcome, the focus is on the process. And we're alive today, and we're going to be alive tomorrow, and this may happen soon, it may happen further down, but we have a life to live in between here and there. And it's really about doing what we need to do and not focusing so much about whether it's going to work or not. Because we don't know whether it's going to work. We don't know how well it's going to work. We don't know how bad things are going to get. We just need to do the right thing and get there from here and live our lives. And so that kind of refocus to one day at a time, or to, focus on the problem that we have to solve today. Don't worry so much about whether or not somebody else is solving the other 10 million problems that have to be solved. We got to start somewhere.
Okay, we have an order if you're ready. Yeah.
So greetings.
Greetings.
So I want to build a little bit on what you said, Phoebe and Kathy, that I think that talking about other movements, other kinds of denial, I think that we need to look at not just climate change, but racism, poverty. All of these things are affecting the same people. The privileged of us in this room who are not affected by them are the people who are part of the culture that is perpetrating this on the other 99%. Okay, I mean, I don't know where I exactly fall, but I know that it's not, among the people who are having trouble getting their farm, making their mortgage payments on their farm, and are trying to decide whether they're going to take a fracking lease or give up their family tradition. And sorry, we need to recognize that there are a lot of people being oppressed by the system, and that climate change can fit into that in the sense that those people are already suffering from climate change, and they're already suffering from this system because they've always been the oppressed, the poor, the minorities have always been the ones who have lost out when things get bad, and they know that, you know that, right? and if we can recognize that all of us have these commonalities between these different movements, that we're trying to bring more equality in, and we're trying to get to the point where these few people who are pushing fossil fuels on us aren't the people who own the entire country, then maybe we can work together, and maybe we can build something that will move nations.
Thank you. The person over here. Yes.
Yeah. Hi. I'm Carol Chalk. I'm on the county legislature. And I'm interested to hear who people are as they talk, because I see a lot of names on emails, and it's nice to match the names and the faces. I think there are similarities and differences, coming back to the question there. What feels a little different about the climate change issue is the fact that is that we literally could be facing the lack of ability of the Earth to sustain human life. And so that does feel like it's the problem above all problems. On the other hand, what feels similar about it to many of the other problems that we have faced and continue to face, it's somehow wrapped up in the question of denial and versus powerlessness. I get approached by a lot of people in my role in the legislature saying, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you do this. I could never do it. And so I see an awful lot of, how do you do it? How do you, a lack of a sense of how do I empower myself on a personal level to take it from this step to the next step? How do I be, can I become more articulate? Can I be the person out there making a speech? I never thought I could. Or writing, or what's the piece that I could take? Or how do we, on a community level, how can we bring it to the next level, or on a societal level? And I see very little climate denial. I hear from a lot of people, and I see in state reports and federal reports and community reports that people, for the most part, people are aware that there are issues. The question is, how do we deal with the issues, and that there's something for me about if we can break it into more manageable chunks, and whether you're looking at how do you set a living wage, or how do you deal with institutional racism, or this big question of change, that if we can find ways each other to develop ourselves, and I found that in my work with with farmers about the fracking issue, how do you deal with that with bankers and real estate professionals? How is it affecting our work, and what next step can we take, as well as people who already think of themselves as wanting to deal with the climate change issue. So that's my recommendation and my thoughts.
I'm going to try to be brief because I have more thoughts about 3 and 4, so I just want to sneak in a little tiny thing. Number 2, one of the things that used to be different, that's not as different, I think, is people used to say we're not able to do long-term thinking very well because we're, like a lot of the things you were saying, we're tuned into how to problem solve what's immediately right in front of us. But in the last year or 2, it's become immediately right in front of us for more and more people. So I think the long-term, short-term thing is beginning to break down more. And I agree with all the people that are saying it's a systemic issue. So it really, the kind of denial that makes it possible for people not to notice how extreme poverty is 5 miles out of Ithaca or in certain neighborhoods within Ithaca, it's the same mechanism in that way. But the thing that I find that still feels kind of special is that when we think about the fact that a system can actually collapse, a biosphere can start really collapsing so that maybe a few species might survive it, but that we actually killed our mother, that we've actually taken a family member that feeds all of us, and we've poked away enough holes at the lungs and at the body, and that actually it's possible for that whole thing that we live in together, that we've killed it, is just, it causes so much grief, it's hard to comprehend how it would feel to kill your own mother. That's what we're doing. And that's just a horrible grief to live with.
So, Jim Busher, first of all. Yep.
Yeah, and then we're going to go to the third one. We'll just do 1, 2, 3. Okay?
Briefly, I will introduce myself because I haven't been personally to this group. My name is Arthur Brenner. I'm from Corny. I just wanted to say that the number 2, one thing that's similar to climate denial is fracking denial. There's a part of fracking, I'm very opposed to fracking, but we deny a lot of things. We look at it and we say, oh, all those farmers are leasing their land to the, why are they doing it? Because they're going out of business and they can't afford to pay their mortgages. Why is that? You dig a little deeper, it's because commodities like milk, dairy products have been underpriced and all the profit goes to the retail part of the industry. And so it sets them up for failure. And at the same time, there's another piece of denial in fracking that's huge, and that is when all of the good white folks of this part of the country say that this land has been in our family for generations. I won't even finish that thought. Should I finish that thought? Yeah. How about the people who had in their land that same land in their family for hundreds of generations before you came and took it from them? Oh. The Native Americans. Just for those who weren't thinking along those lines. But the one big thing, the overarching thing that I don't know, I've only recently become aware of because of having met a couple of people, Will Provine, who used to be a professor at Cornell, and a professor at CCC, Greg Caruso, who both study issues related to free will. And one of the things they talk about is called the just world fallacy. And this is not talking about those people who want the world to be just. This is talking about those people who believe that the world is just. They believe that they, up here with their wealth, they look down at the people at the bottom who are suffering the most, and they say they get what they deserve. If they're poor because they are not working hard enough, they're lazy, they're living off welfare, etc., etc., etc. And what I've learned from my friends is that this is based on a fallacy. And the fallacy is that that the existence of a sort of a cosmic justice or order serves to rationalize people's misfortune on the grounds that they deserve it. I'm not expressing myself well, but the...
Yes.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Okay.
We got it.
Okay, well,
Yes.
thank you.
And Tommy, and then we'll roll to the next one. Time to go
Me? I'm not quite sure I'm going with the denial on this, but I was in Haiti not too long ago after the earthquake. And the last thing that you think of there is, oh my God, these people are making a mess of this island and causing tremendous pollution, burning tires, burning whatever they have in order to scrounge a living. You want them to have what you have. You don't want to. It's hard to explain. You don't want them to, the last thing they're thinking about is the environment. Yet that's all contributing to all of our problem. And that's on that population is larger than our lucky population that is living on the top 1%. So I think we deny how desperate it is in third world countries, fourth world countries, even worse. I just don't think we have the vaguest idea of how desperate it is, and how do we possibly go to a country like that and say, you guys have got to clean this up. I came home, as I said, I didn't wish for them to have more. I eventually wished for me to have less. And it made me think about the gentleman from England, Klaus or Hans, who said that we become complacent. I think one of the things that we deny ourselves is the growth that comes with challenge and change. And it's kind of amazing. I just had a recent change in my life, and it's opened up tremendous, wonderful things. I'm not saying that this is a wonderful thing by any means. I mean, this is the worst thing that we could possibly imagine. But we have to think that there's, maybe only having one kind of toilet paper, or only having, having less choices is actually a positive thing. But we're being led this line that more is better, more is better. Is it really? Do we really think we want more? I mean, I'm talking on a huge, I'm not talking, I just need another $10 to get me to the end of the month. I think we are denying ourselves the thrill of achieving something that comes with challenge and change. So maybe there's something to put into one of your wonderful stories about what happens good. The complacency is sort of what struck me, and the fear of change. Are we really that comfortable watching TV at 8 o'clock at night? Really that much fun?
Really quickly say something that's directly pertinent to that. Which country has the most depression in the world? Really, who's on medication? Us, In Haiti, those dudes that are burning tires. They're not necessarily all happy, but I'm saying people that work with their hands and can work till they're tired are a lot happier than people that. Sorry, Tommy. Sorry, Tommy.
Oh, don't apologize to me. Okay. I appreciate your grace, though. I'll let you experience whatever you need to experience with that. You open the door, I have to walk into it, not I would disrespect you. And you, please understand, from my perspective, in my humble opinion, I am not the only one oppressed. If you're walking in denial about white privilege, you emerge as a prisoner, as the other person. On the subject of slavery, I beg to differ. Post-traumatic stress disorder, you with me?
Yeah, I am.
I came from Africa. I was comfortable where I was. Of course, not talking about my generation. You and African kings brought me here. And you tried to rip me of my humanity, my dignity. That is trauma, true? Think about this. We have thrived in that tenacious spirit. I think sometimes when we look at prejudice, systemic racism, institutional racism, and we look at the people who we have power over, we look at them as if they're powerless. I come from a rich background. My DNA is rich. My people are rich. We would not be denied. And sometimes when people say, I give you a gift tonight, I have beautiful Anglo-Saxon, European brothers and sisters, white folks, say, Tommy, I don't see what you black. Thank you for the land statement. I'm Native American as well. My tribe is Choctaw tribe. Here's the point I want to make to you. There's some good people when they say, I don't see, Tommy, that you're black. What they're really saying is, I'm afraid of being considered a racist or prejudice. So I see past your blackness. Hello? I walk in my blackness. It's not to deny you of your beauty, but our own minds. But there's a lot of, I don't speak for anybody but myself and my family, but I believe there's a lot of people of color that would take exception to the fact that they have no power, that they are so oppressed they can't use their gifts and resources. I just wanted to share that. Slavery, right here in Ithaca, is alive and well. And it's all about power. Quickly on the subject of poverty, I'm engaged in a lot of conversation with people about poverty. When we're looking at ethnicity, can I touch you? He and I can both live in an abject poverty, and he can still walk in white privilege. And frankly, I'm a little bit emotionally exhausted when we start talking about poverty and racism and don't recognize that there's a lot of power. And systemic racism, economically, we make a lot of money off it. We really don't want to share the power. Thank you for my perspective. I don't live in Ithaca, but I'm administrator for several agencies. I do a lot of work. I would love outside of this forum, let's have some courageous conversation.
Yeah.
Let's agree to disagree. And then let's look at how we can heal and how we can affirm our humanity in such a way that we bring something to the table. I'm like Phoebe, don't get me started.
You know, I have to say something to the comment about the slavery piece, because it like really, you can't, it's just like I can't compare what happened to the Jews with what happened to slavery. All those pieces there is very, very painful, extremely painful. And to compare it to, compare climate change to that is just like saying, I don't know, it just makes me kind of sad to hear that. But anyway, since I'm up, no, I wanted to talk about the movement and the climate change movement and that whole piece there. What scares me about the movement, the civil rights movement, is that what happened, I think, is when people started to divide, that was a movement that couldn't have happened without all movements working together. If the Christians, if the world didn't see what was happening at that time, that's what made it change, I believe. You know, a lot of us celebrate Martin Luther King for that, Rosa Parks, but it was happening around the world, and it wasn't effective until you seen different people from all different races, all different backgrounds, all working together. And when somebody thought that, no, y'all taking our shine, it broke it down. And what happened after that was very sad. And he said, post-traumatic stress disorder, I should be getting a check from the state. Because I was a little 5-year-old girl watching people look like me, hosed down, dogs sicked on them. And so, but I've seen what beautiful stuff was happening too. And so, what I'm saying is, so what I think about when we think of movements, where I don't want to see that same thing happen right now with climate change, racism, systemic and all those things, is that we continue to work together. And that the energy that we share with one another is of love, and that will help change so many other things. So I don't know if I made a lot of sense. Yeah, I did. But thank y'all for letting me talk again.
Well, Lauren has a suggestion.
Well, are we going to move on? Are we going to the next?
Yeah, I was going to, I think, because it's,
someone, was it Lauren? Suggested that we just take a moment and kind of absorb everything that's been shared so far. I think we're way more than halfway. And so much has happened that we just, like, before we move on, if we just take a moment and really reflect silently and personally about everything we've heard and how it's sitting.
I think that's a great idea. Let's do that. It's a tough topic, and it is all interconnected, as so many people have noted tonight. And that was why I thought it would be a good idea to spend a few minutes looking at the many social movements that have struggled against oppression, exploitation, injustice. Because associated with climate change there's the whole issue of climate justice that more and more people are recognizing, articulating, and speaking to, so that perhaps we can be more motivated to actually engage. So I wanted to open it up to looking at many of the social movements. The anti-slavery movement has been mentioned, civil rights, there's women's movement, there's a lot of even back women getting the vote, the suffrage movement, that there's a lot of movements that deal with denial that there's a problem, that women don't have the vote, for example. So let's open that up and start with Andy.
So my background, for someone who asked earlier, my name is Anna Kellis in the sustainability movement here. And one of the things that I was thinking when I was looking at what lessons can we learn, and one of the things that I think that the sustainability movement and climate change movement has suffered from is almost so much passion and so many facts that when a lot of us are talking about the movement, we talk more, and we add more and more and more and more facts, and that can be really overwhelming. And when people don't understand, we add more facts to it. It's like when someone doesn't speak our language, instead of like stopping, we actually talk louder at them. And I feel like the sustainability movement really does do that a lot. I think of a movement in the healthcare world that really was phenomenally successful, and I think of the anti-smoking movement. And I think of those commercials where they have it was really quiet and they have the body bags. And they keep building up, and they're building up all over the city, and they're building all over the world. And the message was really quiet, and there were no words in the commercial. And there was something very powerful, and it affected leads me to want to ask in our movement, how much do we need to say? How much is smart versus how much is too much? And can we unite around what is powerful in a message, and then create that message, and then more importantly, be consistent about that message? And I feel like that will be more powerful than continuing to talk and talk and talk in that fear place. So.
My name is Dick Frankie. I live at Eco Village, and I'm a board member of Sustainable Tompkins, so obviously everything I say is going to be true, right? I think one of the essential characteristics of social movements is that they often fail. And when they fail, we don't talk about them as much. I was interested that you mentioned the women's movement, which got the vote, but we couldn't get the Equal Rights Amendment. But at least for the successful movements, one of the characteristics is that they don't follow a linear path. It's not like there's 100 years, and each year you get 1 year closer to your goal, and then between the 99th year and the 100th year, we finally tip over. What happens is completely different. The movement goes along for a long time and makes relatively little, maybe occasional achievements, but at a certain point, various forces come in, some of which are completely beyond, something that the people in the movement did. Outside factors come in, and then suddenly things happen. And we saw that recently with gay marriage. I mean, if you just think back, like 7 or 8 years ago, how many of you thought, oh, well, in a couple more years, everybody's going to, and even in New York State, right? And now suddenly, not only do we have all these states passing, all these federal judges suddenly appeared out of nowhere and are throwing out anti-same-sex marriage laws. So, that's the kind of thing. That's what happened with the civil rights movement, with the anti-Vietnam War movement, with the anti-apartheid movement. All of a sudden, we reached a certain denseness point where the power shifted over to the movement. And I think all of us who think that we're activists and are trying to be activists and change things for the better, the lesson I get out of that is we just have to basically keep at it, because we don't know when those forces, that configuration of forces, is going to be in our favor. But if it is, and we're not ready for it, we could miss the chance, because it doesn't come that often.
Hear, hear.
And who hasn't spoken before? I mean, I just want to make sure that we're giving the opportunity to people who haven't spoken before we, you folks who haven't.
My name is Bill Houston. I'm crew, but and I feel like in a forum like this, maybe we can blur the boundaries a little bit. And I appreciate this audience. I was very, I would say, maybe triggered by some of the things that you were saying earlier, and I hope you would allow me to. I hope you would allow me to express myself.
If it's a compliment, go right ahead.
Okay. So what I want to ask you is that even to suggest that you just look at yourself and look at what some of the things you said, and I would ask you. Somebody else talked about earlier limiting beliefs.
Yes.
So first of all, when you talk about white privilege,
yes.
To me, that's a form, in my mind, that's a form of racism, because what racism is that you're judging me without knowing anything about me by the color of my skin.
Okay.
You look at the color of my skin and you say, you're a product of white privilege. And that omits any knowledge of any personal hardship or suffering that I've lived in my life, and I don't think that's fair.
Let me
just finish, if you don't mind.
I just want to know if it's a rhetorical question. Do you want me to respond?
Well, I just want to express how I was triggered by the things that you were saying. So, when you talked about I was taken from Africa, and you said, well, I really wasn't taken from Africa. My ancestors were.
Yes.
So, just be mindful of what you're saying. It's like, are you suffering because of a story that you're telling yourself, or are you suffering because the story, it's the story of your suffering, or it's a made up story? And then lastly, I would just say that when you look at the world and you see institutional racism, if you look at the world and imagine that institutional racism exists, the day that it disappears, I would suggest you're going to miss it.
Okay.
we have to expect, we can't really hang on, to these ideas that bind us.
This would be a conversation when you take out.
This would be, I would just like to, be able to complete, expressing myself as we all were courteous to you. I would just suggest that when you talk about, we just can't hold on to these ideas that bind us. There's a wise man a long time ago that said everything is always changing. We have to expect change. And when we look at the world and say, the world is screwed, it's hopeless, we're going to be destroyed by climate change or all of these things that we've talked about tonight, or we can say everything's always changing. Maybe a miracle will happen. And I believe in my system that if we expect a miracle, if we expect liberation and freedom from our bondage, that we can achieve that.
Let me just say to you, I appreciate your comment, but I'm thankful that you shared your truth with me. I'm okay with that because I share mine. First of all, I don't see institutional racism. Secondly, I feel it. Thirdly, if you listen to my words, I said post-traumatic slave disorder. I used the example of stress disorder. There was a saying that we do not see things as they are. We see things as we are. I don't have it twisted, okay? I know my past. There's a mythical bird called Sankofa that flies looking backwards because it never wants to forget its past. What's problematic for me, about you and I collectively, is that we're in denial. Slavery is a black mark on us. It doesn't have to define our humanity today. But I would be remiss if that didn't embrace my reality. When you say be careful what you say, I'm too calculated and selfish to not know what I'm saying. I know exactly what I'm saying, and I'm willing to pay the price for it. I would disrespect all of you if I thought I lived in a world where white privilege don't exist. The question that begs to be answered is, what type of environment did I grow up in? I didn't grow up in abject poverty. I come from a family of civil rights leaders. I've had my own privilege. And I have to look at how does my privilege affect. But thank you for your comments, because I believe in a courageous conversation. And I would welcome you and anybody else. Let's have a cup of coffee, a cup of tea. Buy me lunch, I'll buy you lunch, and let's keep the dialogue going.
Thank you both. As I pointed out earlier, in terms of our salon conversation agreements, acceptance of a diversity point of view is important, even if we think that it would be fruitful to have additional conversations to explain more in more detail. But since it's 10 to 9, I want to just maybe take one more comment on the social movement piece of it, and then that's what we might be able to try is quick ideas on approaches that seem useful in overcoming denial, and then I do want to save a couple of minutes at the end for just people who have things to say, like I know Gabe Shapiro has something he wants to share. So.
I'd like to say something about social movements really quickly, because I so resonated with what you said, and I think we have an example of it right in front of us now with the Healthcare Reform Act. And it wasn't really a social movement. It was maybe more of a political movement of very determined forces. But I wrote an article about healthcare and what a mess it was 25 years ago, one of my first assignments as a reporter in Washington, when there were 36 million unemployed that no one knew about. And now, and I can't tell you how many times I covered, the attempts to get health care passed, only really which the kind of general public keyed into maybe much later when Hillary Clinton made the first effort. But there were kind of ongoing efforts and just pounding at the base for years and years and years and years. And then eventually we finally have the Affordable Care Act, for all its problems, is nevertheless a huge step towards universal health care, which has been a social problem, a healthcare problem, an economic problem, and injustice problem for this country since the beginning. So I like that idea that we have these things that are just bubbling along, and eventually there's a critical mass. Something happens, and we might be getting close to that with climate change. The weather is unfortunately helping us.
This also goes back to an earlier comment about the process, and I think it's a matter of engaging in the process, fighting the good fight, basically, and it keeps, it kind of keeps my spirits up about it, and then, you just have to have some hope that at some point there's a breakthrough, and you may be there to see it or not, but.
And I think another thing that has come up often tonight is the interconnectedness of all the movements and all the issues. That racism and poverty we talked about a lot tonight. And climate impacts are just going to make all that worse. So we have to work on this larger vision of moving the human species into a more loving relationship with each other, because that will start to show us, I think, more solution paths than just some geoengineering, please, to quick rescue us. Because, we still won't be rescued if all we do is geoengineering.
The social movement. I categorize it as a social movement. You may not. The living wage.
Yes, I was thinking of that too.
Yes, good point.
So, Chris.
I just want to express that I was so moved by Tim DeChristopher, and I think that his interview on Moyers really spoke to me more than the whole documentary in Bitter 86. But he's basically telling us, bad things are going to happen, but it's up to each of us to look at the social justice and all the dislocations are going to happen, all the suffering is going to happen from this, but the inherent unfairness, and to try to rectify that the best we can. And I think what, unites this with some of the other struggles goes back to, I remember Dan Berrigan, Father Berrigan once saying, if I thought I was going to change the world, I would have given up a long time ago. and one of the things that, I became aware of my early upbringing with some of my friends who were in the Catholic worker movement was, it really was a matter of personal salvation. Because it really bad things, we do what we can every day, we should. But if we don't, we've lost our soul. So it is very much a spiritual struggle that we're in.
And what better thing to do with our lives, right, than to be in that struggle. It is 5 of. I wonder if people want to just do a pepper of what gives you some inspiration in terms of what do you imagine that you might go and do that would be useful on this particular topic of climate denial? There's lots of things that we might go out and do on lots of things, but just on the topic of tonight, which is climate denial. Are you leaving with any new ideas for how you might talk about it with others or address this issue of climate denial?
Well, one of the things I think that I see coming clearer is that if we talk about climate denial and explicitly link it to the other ways that the current cultural and economic system inhibits and oppresses everyone, then we can get back to the spirit of what Occupy was about. Occupy was kind of weak on program, but it hit a chord that really affected many, many people across many, many sectors. And we need to be able to talk about it in a way that shows interest and empathy for all human beings and all species, so that we can't get split off and stereotyped as, oh, you just care about the polar bears, we care about people. And that's really the death of the movements, and it keeps getting engineered, not only from our own internalized stereotypes, but that keeps getting thrown in from right-wing think tanks. So we need to actually focus on solidarity, 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 and empathy, so that we can actually come back to the experience of the 99%.
Bravo, thank you.
So I didn't stand up before and introduce myself, so I will this time. I am Alicia Alexander, and I am a hospitality person, although I don't look it tonight, but I am with Amazing Grace Bed and Breakfast. And I guess one of the ways that I personally have chosen to address or undress climate change deniers is a little bit of perhaps a circumvention, which is to find something that perhaps, instead of arguing over whether this is happening or that is happening, to attempt to find the thing that we can agree on. And as such, I've been working with a movement called Go Green New York, which you can Google, www.gogreennewnyork, or Facebook it, which is just something that has come up to create, a lot of people are not very excited about being on the train coming toward them, but they're really excited about getting on the train as it goes by, as it's coming by and slowing down. So the Go Green New York movement is about going sustainable and going towards something. Even if you deny that climate is changing or whatever, you can't deny that there's a limit to the amount of fossil fuels that are left in the planet, and so that we'll have to at some point adjust to this. And so why not now? And with Denmark at 50% and so many other European countries at 25% and above, we can see that it's doable, and it's kind of a little bit trendy now. So it makes it fun. I mean, I'm really sorry to keep going back to this, but this is a tough time that we're living in, and joy really is a strong motivator. And to have something that you can feel like you're actually doing that is exciting, and that may be a winning team and may not, but golly days, I'd still rather be on that team than that one. I think that's an important piece not to overlook, is to as challenging as it is, and I think all of us have experienced that, it's nice to come at it feeling like maybe we can, we're going to try. So.
That's great, thank you.
Well, I don't know, it's 9 o'clock, I don't know how y'all feel.
Voices we haven't heard yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyone else? Yes.
Some
Yes.
brevity remarks so that we can be wrapping it up.
I'm Irene Weiser, and a council member in the town of Caroline. I also am helping to coordinate a movement regarding a climate change issue happening in our own backyard in Lansing, about the power plant there and the proposal to so-called repower it, convert it to burning methane gas, as opposed to finding new ways to build an economic base in Lansing that move us in a sustainable direction. So I have here petitions. I honestly don't know if there's enough to go around the room. I'll pass them around. And if you would please not only fill them out, but write your email address legibly. We'll add you to our list to keep you informed about what's going on.
So we can put two names on if we need to. Right?
Sure.
Thanks, Irene.
Thank you.
That's great.
Yeah,
Where's Gabe? I know that he, yes.
Thank you. My name is Gabe Shapiro. I speak for the Tompkins County Youth Action Network. I had two things, actually there's so many things I wanted to say tonight. But two things. One, here at the Sustainability Center on May 14th at 6:30, there's going to be a youth panel where young people are going to be talking about these things. And we're going to have maybe 6 to 8 young people kind of showcased from all backgrounds and all sectors of the community, kind of talking about their personal journeys and what sustainability means to them at this age. And I think you'd be surprised. In Ithaca, we have some brilliant and forward-thinking young people. So come here Wednesday, May 14th at 6:30. The other thing is, I don't know how many of you know about the McCutcheon versus FEC Supreme Court ruling that came down. I'm working with some folks at the Tompkins County Workers Center, and I have these little booklets that we're trying to get out as far and wide to everybody, so I'm going to pass them around. I'm hoping everybody can get a copy. If not, please let me know. We're trying to get them to every door in the county because we're trying to put pressure on Senator O'Mara to make a decision by April 28th on this Supreme Court hearing, the Supreme Court ruling. So please just take these. There's a lot of very, very important information, and thank you all for coming tonight.
Yes, Carol.
We are in the last, 2 weeks? April 30th is the deadline for comments on the 2014 New York State Energy Plan. energyplan.ny.gov. The upside of the plan is that New York State has finally wants to set a target for emissions reductions, 80% by the year 2050. It's a great goal. We applaud New York State. The downside of the plan, if you say nothing else, the downside of the plan is that New York State doesn't set any way to get there, any manageable ways to get there, and they're only even aiming to achieve 5.5% truly renewable energy sources. So the upside, the downside, weigh in.
Look at Go Green New York, because that's a great site to go to rally for a specific date for sustainability.
Yeah. And Sarah has had, there's an event next week.
I just want to announce next Wednesday at the Unitarian Church, 7 o'clock, Dr. Tony Angraffia will be there to talk about 100% renewable energy. We're moving forward.
Right.
If you want to hear a positive scenario of how New York can do it, come Wednesday night, Unitarian Church, 7 o'clock.
I want to.
This whole thing is on
There's time for Karen and Kathy.
Wait a minute. Karen's going to say something, but I wanted to encourage you. We have some cards back there. I would love to get your feedback on tonight's salon, and anything you want to share, you could write it down and leave it with us there at the back. That would be very useful to us in terms of doing more of these. And so Karen wanted to make an announcement, and Miranda.
And so I wanted to encourage any of you who came in and didn't get a chance to sign in to please at least write down your name so that you know that you're here. We have membership forms and envelopes for you to take with you. We cannot do this work without your support. It's really important to us. There's actually a place to drop any change you have, or small bills, or large bills.
We appreciate the cover
rebate checks,
putting on the salon series.
and to thank all of you for coming and for participating. It's really great that these gentlemen were here to take this, because there were a lot more people that couldn't come that will be able to now participate, but we won't be able to continue to do that without money.
I want to invite you to Cortland on Monday night at 7 o'clock. Irene is going to be talking. Yes. Hello. I'm announcing the talk. So come over to Cortland. It's not that far. It's if you know where the community restaurant is, it's right across from there, 9 Main Street. So just come to 9 Main Street, go upstairs. You can hear more about this issue of changing the Cayuga power plant from coal to natural gas and why we're opposed to that.
You should carpool though.
Yes.
Miranda, and then we're going to wrap all the...
Please leave your name tags at the back as you exit.
So this is a 30-second pitch. Yale did a study that found that if you tell people that, if you give them, say that apocalypse is coming, that climate change is real, they say you're full of it. If you say climate change is real and here's why, and here are some solutions, they say, oh, thank you so much for your expertise, thank you for warning me. So I think that offering solutions is really, really important, even if we don't know that they're going to work. Our best guesses, the fact that, we have to be working the problem. And a piece that I think is really key to, one of the many solutions that has to happen is a carbon tax. I've gotten involved with an organization that's working single-mindedly on a federal carbon tax. It's called Citizens Climate Lobby. It's an amazing organization. It's national. I just started a local chapter. I'll be talking about it on June 19th in the salon about what can citizenry do. But if you're interested in learning about it before June 19th, feel free to contact me. You can find out my contact information through Gay. We meet monthly, and it's a really, really empowering, joyful, can-do, no doom and gloom, and dealing with the denial people by working on issues that they care about that aren't about climate change, like talking about the economics of why a carbon tax it makes a lot of sense.
So I just wanted to thank you one more time for all of you for participating, for attending tonight. I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible on May 8th for the next salon, in which we're going to be looking at how our economy works and what technology might be out there, what are some of the solutions, and what are we rubbing up hard against. I also wanted to mention May 3rd, we're also hosting a workshop on microhydro systems out in Lansing. You can find all the details on the Sustainable Tompkins website. So if you know anybody who lives rural or has a creek with some water moving through, we'd love to see microhydro be the source of more local jobs and more local energy. Thank you again, everyone. It's been a real blessing to be with you. For being our speakers.